What exactly is US containment strategy towards China? And equally important, what can China do to counter that? Welcome to Middle Geo Briefings, and this is the question we'll explore in today's video. And if you like such topics and would like to know more, do press subscribe and the bell button so you'll be able to keep your geopolitical eye over the world sharp and updated. So, in the US-China competition, what we are witnessing right now isn't just a shift in trade policy or a few military exercises in the Pacific. We are watching a global balancing act unfold. On one side, the United States is trying to limit China's geopolitical reach, especially at the sea. On the other, China is looking for ways to push back, gaining maneuvering space and break through the American ring that surrounds it. To better understand the nuts and bolts of this strategy, let's consider the wider picture. The United States is tired of being the world's hegemon. This role meant overextension, diplomatically, militarily, economically, and the American public has grown wary of carrying the burdens of being the only real empire responsible for almost all of the globe. Since the end of the Cold War, the US found itself in a challenging position. That is because, ironically, its victory against the Soviet Union has been too definitive, which meant a big problem. Why is that? Because the Cold War offered a balance. Two perfect enemies, ideologically and geopolitically opposed, shared responsibility for managing the world. But when the Soviet Union dissolved, the US was left alone, and that meant having to manage everything, which in turn led to overreach. After 25 years of global hegemony, internal fatigue is setting in. This isn't a matter of military decline or economic collapse. This is about public will. Americans from both sides of the political spectrum are now questioning the empire. Liberals, especially those influenced by the woke movement, believe the US has abused the world and needs to back off. Conservatives, particularly those around Trump's MAGA movement, think the contrary, namely that the world has abused the US and they want to retreat within their borders to stop that. To be fair, MAGA might be favoring a stronger role in the Americas, maybe even a revived Monroe Doctrine, but surely not a global American role. But here's the catch. Empty geopolitical space doesn't exist. When the US pulls back, others step in. And today, there are plenty of contenders ready to fill the space. Russia, Turkey, Iran, Japan, but one stands above the rest in terms of capacity. China, of course. To understand China's behavior, we need to understand its historical narrative. The period from the 19th century to the mid-20th is remembered as the century of humiliation, when China's dominance in Asia was lost to Western powers and Japan. The Communist Party has promised a reversal, a new century of resurgence. And that resurgence, according to the party's own narrative, must include reincorporation of Taiwan. But there is a problem. The United States is not about letting that happen. Why? Because control of the globe depends on control of the seas. The US, like Britain before, has become a thalassic empire, a sea power. And its main strategic objective in East Asia is to prevent any other power, especially China, from asserting marine dominance. To achieve this, the US has built a system of concentric lines of containment. The outer line includes Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands in the north. The middle line is formed by Japan and the Philippines. But the first, the most critical line, stretches from the Korean Peninsula to the South China Sea, and at its center lies exactly Taiwan. Taiwan is not just a diplomatic dispute, it's a strategic anchor. For China, controlling Taiwan would break through the first American line of containment and give it freer access to the Pacific Ocean. And that's why the island is so fiercely contested. And with this, we now have a perfect geopolitical storm. An America that's stepping back but not willing to let go, and a China that is rising and pushing forward. Until recently, the US had the upper hand. Its allies, South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, formed a solid wall around China, making any attempt to expand influence or even take Taiwan by force extremely risky for Beijing. But then something changed: Trump's global tariff policy. When the US imposed tariffs even on its closest allies, this was seen by them as proof that America cannot be trusted anymore. Allies were suddenly treated like adversaries. And China? Well, this retaliated with full-blown trade war and tariffs that started to exceed 100%, making goods effectively unaffordable. All of these forced countries to reevaluate their trade relationships. Even historical enemies started talking. And that's how, on March the 22nd, the foreign ministers of Japan, South Korea and China, yes, that China, met in Tokyo to discuss common ground on regional security and economic cooperation. That would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. So where does this leave us? The US now faces a hard choice. If it continues down the path of tariffs and economic nationalism, it risks driving allies away and China closer to them. In response, we are already seeing a shift. Trump has announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for nearly all countries except China. Chips and phone components have been excluded from tariffs temporarily. Cars might be next. At the same time, Washington is working on another front, trying to detach Russia from China. That means possibly making concessions in Ukraine to bring Russia back into a semi-cooperative relationship with the West. So don't be shocked if Trump seems to give ground to Putin. It's part of his bigger play. Meanwhile, China sees its chance. It's not afraid of a trade war. It's leaning on domestic demand, forming new trade partnerships, and stepping up its diplomacy. The meeting with Japan and Korea was just the beginning. Now, the European Union is in play. EU leaders are planning a major summit in Beijing with Xi Jinping this July. The message is clear. China wants to become Europe's backup plan, and Europe, pushed by US tariffs, might be open to the idea. But there are limits. China has little time to act, as the US security umbrella is still a formidable guarantee which keeps its allies happy to remain under Washington's reign. These openings by US allies towards China could easily be only a temporary bluff intended to send a message to the United States saying that alternatives exist. It will not be so easy for China to establish better trade ties with other export-oriented countries or blocs, starting from the European Union. Any Chinese attempt to flood the European market with its products, risking to endanger an economy itself in trouble by diminishing export windows to America, would be met with opposition. Beijing should play on the long term, something difficult to do if the Trump administration, or the one after it, should decide to reverse its recent course. More Chinese investment could be welcome, but it should be done inside Europe, allowing for development of more partnerships with the continent, and not simply to create hubs to ease imports from China. Beijing will thus have to revisit its One Belt, One Road strategy towards Brussels. The US has already dialed back its initial hardline stance. China is pressing forward, but carefully. Neither side has played their final card yet. That's why the coming months will be critical. Will the US rebuild trust with its allies? Will China succeed in expanding its influence or overplay its hand? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's the best way to stay ahead.